Hi, I'm Miss Curious. I live in your mind. I question things. That's how you learn and grow. Wondering what I'm doing here? You know, she says that a lot of plants require only one parent plant to reproduce. She's planting some flowers and vegetables today. So I thought I can tag along. Shh! Here comes Arnold.
Hi, Mom. The garden looks so colorful. And what are you planting this season?
Well, just some roses, some pumpkins and potatoes for the vegetable patch.
You know, it's very interesting how you use seeds to plant pumpkins, but a stem for a rose plant. And it looks like you are using whole potatoes too.
That's true. But can you recall ever seeing a rose seed? Or a potato seed for that matter?
No, I can't. You're right. They don't seem to have seeds at all, do they?
These plants have lost their capacity to produce seeds. That's why sexual reproduction is not possible in these plants. So, they use their vegetative parts to reproduce. It's an interesting phenomenon because not many animals can reproduce this way. In fact, depending on their body designs, various organisms reproduce in different modes. It's an interesting study. In this lesson, you will learn about the modes of reproduction in plants. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to list the modes of reproduction in living organisms. Explain how the mode of reproduction of an organism is related to its body design. Explain how unicellular organisms reproduce by fission. And illustrate the types of asexual reproduction in multicellular organisms: fragmentation, regeneration, budding, vegetative propagation, and spore formation. We were talking about reproduction and body designs of organisms. At a very basic level, let's consider unicellular and multicellular organisms. Now, let's relate the body designs to modes of reproduction. Living organisms can reproduce in two modes: asexual and sexual. The asexual mode of reproduction is when a single individual is responsible for creating a new generation of species. For example, new plants are grown without the production of seeds. The sexual mode of reproduction, on the other hand, requires two individuals to create a new generation of that species. So, the germ cells of two parent plants are combined to create the seed for a new plant. That's how human beings and animals reproduce. In plants, this mode of reproduction produces seeds which lead to new plants. See that hibiscus plant. Hibiscus cannabinus uses the asexual as well as sexual mode of reproduction. Let's first look at the simpler mode of reproduction, that is, the asexual mode. The asexual mode of reproduction can take many forms: fission, fragmentation, regeneration, budding, vegetative propagation. and spore formation.
Wow! So many ways of reproduction.
True. But let's begin at the very beginning. Can you think of a simple unicellular organism?
How about amoeba?
Good example. Amoeba is a unicellular organism that reproduces by cell division.
You mean a cell dividing into two or more cells?
Exactly. It is also called fission. The mother cells divide to form the daughter cells. Many different patterns of fission have been observed in amoeba. In fact, in organisms like amoeba, the splitting of the two cells during division can take place on any plane. This is called transverse binary fission.
Oh, so do all unicellular organisms reproduce like that?
Not really. Let's look at a unicellular organism that has a more organized body design. For example, the leishmania. Leishmania have a whip-like structure at one end of the cell. Binary fission occurs in a definite orientation in relationship to the whip-like structures.
Leishmania? The name sounds very familiar.
Probably because it causes black fever.
Oh,
Interestingly, the malarial parasite Plasmodium is also a unicellular organism. Plasmodium, however, reproduces by multiple fission. That is, it divides into many daughter cells simultaneously.
amazing how dangerous these small unicellular organisms can be.
Not always, though. Yeast is also a unicellular organism. Yeast, by the way, produces small buds that separate and grow further.
And how about multicellular organisms? Do any of them reproduce like unicellular organisms do?
Well, multicellular organisms can reproduce asexually as well as sexually. But to answer your question, some of the reproductive methods used by unicellular organisms do work with multicellular organisms that have relatively simple body organization. Remember the slimy filamentous green masses that you can see developing on the surfaces of some ponds? That's Spirogyra. Spirogyra reproduces by fragmentation. It simply breaks up into smaller pieces upon maturation.
Ah, so each piece or fragment grows into a new individual.
That's right.
What about other multicellular organisms? Why can't they reproduce by fragmentation?
Because they are not just a random collection of cells. They consist of specialized cells organized as tissues. Tissues are organized into organs, placed at definite positions on the body of the organism. Cell-by-cell division wouldn't lead to another individual in such cases, like human beings. Can you imagine a brain cell breaking off and developing into a complete human body?
No. I see what you mean. So what happens in reproduction of such organisms?
They use more complex ways of reproduction. There is typically a single cell type in the organism that is capable of growing, multiplying, and creating other cell types under appropriate conditions. This can happen through regeneration, budding, vegetative propagation, and spore formation. Regeneration involves development of new individuals from body parts. For example, consider fully differentiated organisms such as Hydra or Planaria. These can be cut or broken down into many pieces. Each of these cut pieces can grow into separate individuals.
How does that happen?
Remember I was telling you that multicellular organisms have specialized cells for reproduction?
Yes, that's right. So specialized cells are involved in regeneration.
Exactly. These cells proliferate into a large number of cells. From this mass of cells, different cells undergo changes to become various cell types and tissues.
I can't imagine an organism depending on being cut up to be able to reproduce. Can you? Regeneration is actually not the same as reproduction. I decided to read up a bit more on it and found that Hydra and Planaria can reproduce in other ways as well. By the way, regeneration is also called morpholepsis.
So if not cut up, how would an organism like Hydra reproduce?
Good question. Organisms like Hydra can also reproduce by budding. They use regenerative cells for reproduction in the process of budding.
How's that?
In Hydra, a bud develops as an outgrowth due to repeated cell division at a specific site. Each such bud develops into tiny individual Hydra.
Oh, so I guess they detach from the parent body when fully mature and become independent individuals?
Exactly. Now let's get back to your original question about what I'm planting here. Can you tell me which out of these plants reproduces asexually?
I guess the rose plant. You planted just the stem.
That's right. Rose plants reproduce through vegetative propagation. Vegetative propagation involves production of new plants using the vegetative parts of an existing plant. Can you recall some other plants where the stem is used for vegetative propagation?
Let me think.
That looks like something you could grow from a stem.
How about sugarcane?
Very good. You can grow a new sugarcane plant from a part of the stem of the parent plant. In fact, a similar method of vegetative propagation can be used for bananas, oranges, and grapes.
But what's that you have there? You seem to have tied two rose stems together.
Oh, that's called grafting. Through grafting, you can take vegetative propagation one step further and get some desirable characteristics in your plant. In grafting, the tissues of one plant are encouraged to fuse with those of another. I grafted the stems of roses of two different colors. I'm hoping to get a rose in a different shade as the characteristics of the two roses combine through grafting.
You know, grafting is used in some interesting ways. Sometimes gardeners graft related potatoes and tomatoes so that both are produced on the same plant, one above the ground and one under the ground. An amazing concept, isn't it?
That sounds really cool. But how about propagation through a leaf or a bud?
Come over here. Let me show you. This is a bryophyllum leaf. See the buds on the tip of this leaf? When this leaf touches moist soil, each bud grows into a new plantlet. These plantlets eventually drop off and root.
Wow! That could produce a lot of plants. But let's go in for a bit. I am hungry. Can I have some buttered toast?
Quite a few plants here. Now, do any of these propagate like the rose plant? Let's see. Marigold requires seeds. How about the money plant? Of course, I have seen Arnold's mom put a stem of a money plant in a bottle of water and it grows into a plant. And the good thing about it is that a money plant can be planted around the year. But be careful when taking a cutting. Look for the nodes which have roots coming out of them. These are easier to plant and they have more chances of growing. Let's now get back to Arnold and his mom.
Can you guess which other food plant propagates using its buds? Your favorite vegetable, potatoes. Potato itself is a horizontal plant stem with shoots and roots usually underground. Thus, the stem serves as a reproductive structure. Such horizontal underground plant stems are called rhizomes. Look at this potato here. See those buds and notches? If you cut a potato into small pieces, each with a bud or a notch, and place them on a moist cotton piece, each piece could produce a new rhizome in a few days.
That's quick. Don't seeds take a long time to produce new plants?
They do. Vegetative propagation is generally faster than sexual reproduction. That's one of its advantages. Can you think of other advantages of vegetative propagation?
Well, it requires only one parent, doesn't it?
Good observation. But there's more. Let's figure out what the other advantages can be. Remember, plants like bananas and roses have lost the capacity to produce seeds. Vegetative propagation helps in reproduction of such plants. Lastly, observe this rose plant and its parent plant. Can you make out any significant differences? Not really, right? Plants produced through vegetative propagation are genetically similar enough to the parent plant to have all its characteristics. Okay, now for your breakfast. And where's the bread?
Here it is. Looks like we forgot to keep it in the fridge last night. It seems to have something growing on it.
Uh-oh, we can't use this bread. It's gone moldy because we left it outside in moist air.
This stuff is called mold?
In biological terms, it's called a rhizopus. Rhizopus is a simple multicellular organism. Rhizopus or bread mold can grow when bread is exposed to moist air. Remember I told you there are two methods of asexual reproduction in plants.
Yes, of course. One is vegetative propagation and the other is through spores.
Very good. The growth of this mold is an example of asexual reproduction through spore formation. Let's see if we can identify the specific reproductive parts of this rhizopus. Take a close look at this mold. It grows on the bread in the form of thread-like structures called hyphae.
So where are the spores that help it reproduce?
See those tiny blob on a stick kind of structures?
Yes, they seem similar to the stamen that we see in flowering plants.
These blobs are known as sporangia, and these are the structures involved in reproduction. They contain cells or spores that can eventually develop into new rhizopus individuals. These spores are very light. They are covered by thick walls that protect them.
So how exactly do these spores develop into new rhizopus?
When the sporangia mature, they release spores. These spores keep floating in the air and eventually attach themselves to a surface that is moist, and then they start growing. Can you figure out which of the plants here reproduces with the help of spores?
Let me see. Don't these ferns have spores?
Correct. A fern is a rhizopus that uses spores to reproduce. Now, since there's no bread, let me make you some pancakes for breakfast.
Well, let's leave Arnold to enjoy his breakfast. Meanwhile, I have some more interesting information for you. I read about a new advancement in technology that gives us another asexual method for the propagation of plants, tissue culture. The interesting thing about tissue culture is that it enables us to produce exact copies of plants in sterile conditions. Just think, this technique can enable production of exact copies of plants in the absence of seeds, help us produce plants from seeds that otherwise have very low chances of germinating and growing. For example, in the case of orchids and nepenthes. Enable us to clean a plant of viral and other infections and quickly multiply. Let's take a quick look at how tissue culture is done. Tissue, or separating cells, are removed from the growing tip of a plant. The removed cells are placed in an artificial medium where they divide rapidly to form a small group of cells called callus. The callus is transferred to another medium that contains hormones for growth and differentiation. Here, each callus grows into a plantlet. Each plantlet is then placed in the soil so that it can grow into a mature plant. So, that was a great session on methods of reproduction in living organisms, wasn't it? You learnt about the various methods of asexual reproduction in unicellular as well as multicellular organisms. To revisit the key points covered in this lesson, please review the flashcard at the end of this lesson.